Hi everyone, how are we doing? So I want to start by saying a big thank you to those who went before me. Devika and Jenny, that was awesome. And today I want us to take a deep breath together. Inhale and exhale. Awesome. Today I have one goal, and that is to make revolution irresistible. But before I get started, I really just want to let you know that I hope when I'm done speaking you don't forget that I exist all year round. I hope that you remember that you don't need to be a millionaire who owns a media company in order to shape the ways that society is able to build and mold and create itself. I want you to know that this is an arena of change, this is an arena of ideas, and that in this space we can do things a little bit differently. And so my right to freedom, to safety, to self-actualization is your responsibility too, and yours is mine. As it should be for every single Canadian willing to take up space and speak for human rights. Now, I've always been pretty suspicious of spaces that center the individual in conversations about social justice. So I decided today that I'm not going to ground my words in my own experiences of trauma with racism or homophobia, because then if I did, I would end up telling you about how I came from humble beginnings but made it to university. I would end up telling you stories of how I'm Black, but I was able to rise so quickly on a national stage. And that's not what I'm here to do, because it leaves no nuance between myself and any other Black person that you're going to meet on the trajectory of your own individual lives. What's the difference between myself and someone like Condoleezza Rice, who came from such humble beginnings, but purports a very different iteration of what the world can be than myself? I won't be belaboring the plight of the subjugated, nor will I be taking you on a 10-minute field trip to the margins of a Black queer reality. There are people to do that, and it's not me. Instead, I want to do something different, because I think it's really, really dangerous when we focus on individual identity at the expense of a broader political identity, especially in the room that I'm speaking to today. In this arena of change, and make no doubt that that's exactly what this room is, my task is, like I said earlier, in my own small way, to make revolution irresistible, and to discuss the conditions that create the political reality that in turn creates the cultural context that we exist in. So I'm not going to be slicing and dicing my Black queer identity into digestible pieces for you to consume and deem worthy of $1, but I hope at the end of my speech there's something that you want to be a part of. And so today you're going to learn so much more about what binds me to you and you to me than a single philanthropic gift or story of trauma. Because what binds me to every Black queer person, past, present, and future, is the ability to offer a radically different and often better iteration of what the world can be. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tyler Boyce. I'm a part-time professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa, and I'm the first Black executive director of Canada's largest association of two-spirit, queer, and trans organizations called the Enchanté Network. And I want to be absolutely clear that the big thing is not in me being the first, but it's in me not being the last. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story, because I'm still sort of reeling from it. Last month we made history. For the first time in this country, we had the largest convening of Black, queer, and trans people ever here in Ottawa at the National Arts Centre, with one goal in mind, which was to lay the foundation for Canada's first ever national Black queer organization. You can clap for that. It was awesome. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. We cried until there were no more tears. We dipped and duck walked for all those tens across the board. If you know what I'm saying, I heard the laugh, so you do. And just like City News, we let it be known that we are everywhere. We took up space like we always do, and we did it in this melanin-rich black skin that we're in. And I was convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that Black queer people hold the answers to the physical, environmental, economic, social issues that face us today. And in the words of Black feminist, lesbian powerhouse Audre Lorde, we embodied that warning that she gave us, which was that if we do not define ourselves for ourselves, we will be constricted into tiny little boxes and eaten alive. And yet, despite this historic success by a relatively young team, media and pundits only wanted to ask me one thing: why's it gotta be Black? And so, my answer was pretty constant on whatever media outlet I was in. CTV, CBC, City News, I said the exact same thing. And that is, if you don't know, find out on your own time, because I am not gonna eat up my limited airtime. It was really important for me to let them know that I'm not going to eat up my limited airtime justifying my experience at the expense of the Black intellectual activism that this moment requires. And so, I want to offer 3 lessons from that historical convening that I think the institution of philanthropy can learn from. Lesson number 1 is that individualism won't save us. Now, I have no doubt that this is a tremendous community. I'm not wearing my lanyard, but like many of you, mine's also red. It's also my first time here, and I've been really moved in the ways that altruism moves in this space. We all understand that we're interlocked into a system of responsibility to eradicate poverty, homophobia, anti-Black racism, transphobia, etc. But I'm reminded by thinkers like James Baldwin to not look to the well-intentions of good people, but instead look to the institutions from which they are a part of. And so I can't help but be suspicious of the ways in which individualism has wrapped its tentacles into the system of philanthropy. How philanthropy focuses on how $2 a day can save a child in the global south at the expense of a broader conversation about how capitalism has severed that child from the agricultural bounty of her own country. I think about fundraising education that trains otherwise bright individuals to appeal to the egos of those with wealth rather than contest a world of haves and have-nots. We must remember that our individuality is forged in a collective context. We must remember that our own individuality is forged in a broader collective context. And so what I learned from those Black, queer, and trans people in that space is that individualism won't save us. And so I challenge you to ask yourself, just how powerful could the sector of philanthropy be when it stops centering the wealthy individual and instead centers the collective us? Lesson number 2 is that urgency does not negate generosity. Now, if someone else to ask me what's the big word that gets said in philanthropy all the time, I would tilt my head, adjust my glasses like I always do, and ask myself, what is that word? But I would probably land on the word generous. It's said in every book, it's in the majority of speeches and talks I've been a part of at this conference, and I think it's a great word. But what puzzles me is why generosity is only measured in a dollar amount from those of the wealthy. If generosity is to be believed as giving, then I was reminded by Black, queer, and trans people just how much we've given to the world. Was it not Black people that dismantled slavery, overthrew apartheid, and created a possibility model for other marginalized communities to say that they too matter? Was it not us that rocked every single institution in this country, reminding folks that institutions are not static, but indeed they can be changed when we move together as one? And is that not an undeniably generous offering of Black, queer people to the world? It's a certain kind of white supremacy that says, and Black people ascribe to it too, but it's a certain type of white supremacy to deny speaking about human rights and human rights work as the epicenter of generosity. Now, I'm not at all suggesting that philanthropy is not also generous. We all know that it is. But it would be a fallacy to omit the contributions of Black queer people from that exact same discourse. And so I think that we must interrogate the belief that just because work is urgent, it cannot also be generous. Urgent work is indeed generous. And I believe that when we recognize that, we can create partnerships of solidarity rather than partnerships of subjugation and control, and that it is from there that true generosity and philanthropy can reemerge. Number 3. Sometimes reform just isn't enough. In my research into social movements over the past 100 years, a certain pattern has emerged over and over again. And that's that we have a historical tendency to always return back to what the institution was. We have a big uprising, we have a pandemic, we're all seeing it. Things were changing, and now things are going exactly back to how they were before. Most recently, we see it in the ways that there were a number of Black-focused funds that were available and now are being discontinued by 5 foundations and individual givers that Black people watched, usually white folks, cry and say that they are so committed to eradicating anti-Black racism, and those same foundations are cutting funds to support work to eradicate anti-Black racism. And I know that as those concerned with social impact, we can create solutions that sustain the momentum of social justice movements. Whether Black Lives Matter or Indigenous movements for land back or 2S LGBTQI+ human rights, we can sustain that, and we can get out of this loop of boom, bust, and bandwagon, and instead focus on collective intent set by principles and values that we all collectively share. But first, we need to answer the question of what's holding us back. And the answer always goes back to a fear of change. What if transphobia, anti-Black racism, homophobia, and colonial logics of domination and control are so ingrained in our sector that to extricate them would create a sector that none of us even recognize anymore? Are we ready for the kind of change required to meet this moment? So to those of you who understand and embrace change, I admire you, because it's a really, really hard thing to do. You understand that it's about safety, freedom, and possibility, and you have already come to the conclusion that we have to do everything in our power to ensure that this sector does so much more than reproduce exactly what it is we set out to combat. I learned with my Black, queer, and trans siblings, it requires a broader imagination of what decisions are made, who the gatekeepers are, and how the sharing of power can be smooth and imperative rather than discarding and disempowering. That it will require us to interrogate deeply if we are, even without knowing it, upholding the very systems we seek to dismantle. Now, at the beginning of my remarks, I told you that I was going to use my time to make revolution irresistible. And I promised you that you would learn so much more about what binds me to you and you to me. I also told you that this arena of change deserved it. And I cannot wait to bear witness to the ways in which you continue to ensure that this remains an arena of change, ready to do exactly what we already know is possible. Thank you so much.